Got a topic I'd like to talk about today. I saw a Facebook meme, as all good conversations start, and that Facebook meme basically said it is immoral and wrong to adapt the requirements of a job to make it so that everybody can do it if it is a difficult job that not everybody can do. And it is okay for some jobs to be jobs that not everybody can do. I want to give a case in point. I'm here at a camp where participants do a high ropes course. We're going to do everything that we can to make sure that all participants can participate in the high ropes course if they want to. And even if they don't want to, we might challenge them, not force them, but challenge them to do more than they initially thought that they'd be able to or would want to. Part of running a high ropes course is that you have to be able to do rescues. Somebody, actually at least two people, have to be able to work together to rescue somebody from the top of the course if they need that. And in 10 years, approximately 10 years in outdoor education and around camps, I've had a lot more than 10 years around camps because I even went to camps as a camper as a child. But as far as being in the situation and the setting where I'd be expected to facilitate things at a camp, it's been about 10 years and a little over maybe. And in those 10 years, I've only seen one situation in which I actually had to perform a real rescue. I've done a lot of mock rescues, and they are real. We do the real actions of the rescue. We actually physically lower somebody from the course in those mock rescues, but there's a lot of ways to manipulate a mock rescue as well, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail in a minute, to make it easier for the rescuer. But when you're doing a real rescue, there are some accommodations you can genuinely make and legitimately make to make that rescue easier. If you're not able to perform it in one way, there might be alternative ways to go about it, and that can make the rescue possible for a greater range of people. But at the end of the day, there's certain variables that you can't control, and that's why you're doing a real rescue. The one actual rescue that I've had to do was when we were doing a training at a camp, not the one that I currently work at, but at a camp, we were doing a training, and I was facilitating that training. I was giving the trainees, I should say maybe my coworkers at the camp, I was giving them the opportunity to, some of them were above me, some of them were not, in the structure of the camp, but I was giving them the opportunity to run mock rescues because I think that's a really important thing to do at intervals, because these are skills that you lose if you don't use them. So we're doing mock rescues, and in this case, we're actually doing those rescues in order to be approved by me as the person managing the high ropes course at that camp to be a top facilitator who is approved to do rescues. And this was apart from the certification process because, in my opinion, I wanted people to be I wanted them to prove themselves a little bit more, prove themselves capable of doing a rescue a little bit more than I saw through the certification process that we had. So to me, that means that you can perform a rescue off of the most difficult element on the course to rescue somebody from, and that's because you need to be able to do it from the hardest spot. Your participant is not going to do you the favor of needing to be rescued from the easiest spot. In fact, probably the reason that they're going to need to be rescued is possibly related to the fact that that spot on the course is difficult. So they are more likely, not guaranteed, but more likely to need a rescue from the more difficult part of the course than the easier part of the course. If you can't do it from the hardest part, why would I put you up on the course as the person expected to perform a rescue, knowing that you can only do it if you're in ideal location A, B, or C? So anyways, I had doubts that this particular person would be able to perform a rescue from that location, but I don't want to assume anything. So he began to attempt to perform a rescue, and in the process became in need himself of a rescue. He slipped off of the element and was unable to get back onto the element. Um, there's a lot of things that you can try before and should try before jumping into a rescue, but you also need to determine whether those things are going to work or not relatively quickly, because you don't want to leave the person dangling there longer than necessary. There is a potentially fatal um, issue that can happen from dangling in a harness called suspension trauma. And I actually just got more informed on that during training today than I have been in the past, and exactly why it's dangerous. It's dangerous because if you are suspended in a harness and your full body weight, especially if you're a heavier person, is pressing you into that harness, it's going to gradually cut off the circulation to your extremities below the harness, specifically your legs. And all of that blood is going to gradually become deoxygenated. There won't be oxygen in it. And when you finally are rescued and you're brought down and that pressure is relieved, you have a bunch of deoxygenated blood flowing suddenly back into the rest of your body. And that's the dangerous part. I've known about suspension trauma. I've heard about it being in this industry, but it's the first time today that I actually went through a training where I was explained the specifics on what happens and why it's dangerous. And that just kind of goes to show that no matter how many times you've been through training or no matter how much exposure you've had to a certain process, there can always be something more to learn. Anyways, in this case, I ran through the alternatives to try to help this person. I tried to help him verbally. I tried to offer some physical assistance. I pushed an atria, which is essentially a small rope ladder suspended by a carabiner, out to him, asked him to see if he could pull himself up using the atria, and all of those methods failed. He was unable to get himself back onto the element, and I was not able to lift him or assist him in any way to get him back onto the element, regain his footing, and recover himself, even though at this point it was obvious he wasn't going to be certified by me as a top rescuer. So the call that I made was to actually rescue him first, because he was the person who was in genuine need of a rescue, and he was the heavier of the two participants who were in that situation. So I went ahead and did a real rescue for him along with my bottom belayer, because there are two people needed for the type of rescue that is typically trained on. I think that there are probably alternatives that you could come up with, but you don't train to do it that way, because it wouldn't be, it really wouldn't be proper to train on a method that is not as ideal as it can be. You need to staff your place properly rather than relying on some sort of heroic single person type of ad hoc belay in the moment. So anyways, I'm not saying it wouldn't be a good thing to kind of be aware enough of how ropes and equipment and carabiners and ATCs and all sorts of things work, so that you could possibly pull off a one-person rescue in the situation where you need it, but you don't plan on that. You plan on staffing your place to meet the needs that are likely to occur. So anyways, rescued him, reset everything, and rescued the person who was just pretending to need to be rescued. And at this moment, to be honest with you, I can't remember why I didn't just tell that person, hey, stand back up and move. I don't remember. I don't remember exactly why that played out exactly the way it did, but I do remember that I reversed things in the moment because I felt it was more important to get the previous rescuer down first. So as you've been watching this, if you've been watching this all the way to 10 minutes here, I think you can see why it would be unethical. Like, not just something you could complain about from the perspective of, well, we don't want to make everything easy for people all the time. That's a whole different thing. If there are ways to make processes easier for people so that more people can do them, that's a different debate. And that's not really the debate that I'm trying to get into here today. The statement that I'm responding to and affirming is that there are jobs that not everybody can do, and it would actually be unethical to try to accommodate everybody, to try to lower the standards so that anybody can do it, or so that even anybody who wants to or thinks they want to can do it. Because that's great until you're in an actual emergency situation and you're expecting someone who's not physically capable of doing an important task to literally save somebody's life to do that task. It's pretty obvious, it's pretty self-explanatory, and I'm not really going to go into more detail on that thought process. I think you can see what the issue is in this specific case. And if I can come up with just one specific case based on something that I've experienced literally today, surely there's probably more than one scenario in which the same or a similar train of thought would apply. So there are a few things we can do as far as rescues go. Ideally, when rescuing someone from a high ropes course, we're going to hook them up. We're going to connect the participant to the life supporting cable above them, run that line down to the second rescuer, who is the rescuer on the ground, who's going to connect it to a belay device of some kind, and then they're going to lower the participant, and the person up top is going to give them the participant by removing the participant's original sling line, which is their safety connection to that top wire. So that part is the part that's going to be hardest for most people. There could be other issues like the ability to reach that or other parts of the system in general, the ability to physically get out to the participant no matter where they happen to have needed help on the course. Obviously, all of that. But the part that's really, really hard is getting that participant's sling line, which is what was originally connecting them to the course, getting that off of the course once they're safely connected to the rescue rope. There is an accommodation there, and this is, I believe, what I ended up doing when I had to perform a rescue, and it was a real rescue. And it's also important for this to be said, because if you need it, you need it. What I ended up doing was cutting his belay, his original, really important to use correct terminology here. What I ended up doing was cutting his sling line, the thing that originally connected him to the course. And that need can come up for a few reasons. One, they have already maxed out their sling line. If a child has maxed out their sling line and I need to help them in this type of situation, I can probably lift the child using their sling line in order to get some slack at the top of the sling line and disconnect it. With a 250-pound man, I was not able to lift him in order to disconnect his sling line. It wasn't happening. But ideally, that person should not have their sling line maxed out already. And this is something we teach. And it's something we cover really, really well at the camp that I currently work at, and that we tell every participant, but it does not mean that they'll listen or follow the instructions. They should never max out their sling line. And I don't think he had his maxed out. I think he was close because he was trying to give himself room to work with the participant that he was trying to rescue initially. But there was still some room to slide that up. And so ideally, I get him onto the belay, and the person on the ground gets that belay really tight, and I help at the top. We get that belay really tight, and then I can loosen the sling line to get some slack, and because he's nice and taut on the new system, on that belay rope, he's not going to go anywhere. He's not going to just continue dropping. But there was a miscommunication between myself and the person on the ground, and I'm not sure what happened. I don't remember exactly what words were said or misinterpreted or who did what, and it doesn't really matter. Um, I know that what I intended to communicate to the person on the ground was that I needed them to keep him taut, but they thought that I needed slack to work with. Again, I don't know where the miscommunication happened, and it doesn't really matter. I just know that as I released him, hoping that he would be held up in the exact same place that he was so that I could get that line off, instead the person on the ground moved forward, and that allowed his weight to drop down. So as I released him, all that slack was immediately used up, and I was left with a line with no room left to get slack in it. And what I needed to do was cut that line. And what I needed to do before I cut that line was make sure I was cutting the right line. And when you're up on the course like that, and you have your own lines, and you have his lines, and you have the lines of the third person who was originally going to be rescued, and you have the rope in the mix too. And I'm going to be really honest here. As I'm saying this, I'm having this vague memory where I moved to cut my own lines, which looked identical to his. And he, as, yes, somebody who was being rescued, but also as a capable and competent instructor who was also paying attention in this situation, said, "Jimmy, you're about to cut your own line." And I sorted them all out, and sure enough, I think this really happened. This is what I'm remembering as I say it. I remember him catching me before I possibly cut my own line, which could have been disastrous, obviously. And highlights, because I think I'm somebody who stays pretty calm in a difficult situation and who has good situational awareness, and who has and had, even at that time, a relatively good amount of experience. It goes to show how much attention you have to pay and how quickly you can make a mistake in a situation like that. Fortunately, I reassessed. I was, I believe, corrected. I reassessed. I triple checked that I was, in fact, cutting the right line. Cut his sling line, and allowed the person on the ground to lower him down. So there's a lot going on there. And it goes to show that even a capable and competent person, which I do consider myself to be in that setting, can make a mistake, and that the right tools for the job can make that job accessible to more people. That rescue would not have been accessible to me without that tool, without those rescue scissors, or trauma shears, as they're technically called. But the rescue was not accessible to everybody, even with all the accommodations. So if I allowed somebody to become certified because they could demonstrate the skills under the ideal circumstances, and then I put them on the course with the expectation that they would be the lead rescue, the top rescue, which is not necessarily the lead. Both positions are important. But if I put him up there with the expectation that he would be the top rescue, and then we had a situation where he had to rescue somebody from that element, he would not have been able to. And that would be an immoral thing to do on my part. And it doesn't matter how much I appreciate that person, doesn't matter how much I recognize his situational awareness was even better than my own in a certain context, it doesn't matter how much I think that he is competent and pays attention and all of those things. If you're not physically able to do a certain job, it would be wrong for me to put you in the position of doing that job, especially if human lives are at stake. So, like I said, it's extremely rare for somebody to need to be rescued for one of these courses. Extremely rare. The only time in 10 years that I've had to do it was for a staff person during training. But I have heard of settings in which I was not present where where the ability to rescue somebody was necessary, was important, was needed, and was used. Hopefully was used. It's a really sad situation if the need to rescue somebody is present but not used. Or the rescue doesn't happen doesn't happen as it should happen. So that's my video diary entry for the day. I'd like to do more of these. I think that in my broad, maybe I should have said this up front, maybe I will say it up front in other videos, but my broad intention for doing this type of video is to take an issue that may be an issue that people get into some sort of emotional, one-sidedness, based on some sort of ideal or some sort of opinion or some sort of religious or political belief, and just kind of tear it apart from a logical perspective, I hope, and get to the bottom of it, because probably there's some sort of reasonable take, and I hope to generally line up with whatever that reasonable take is, and say, well, let's look at it, and let's take the emotions out of it, or the political aspect out of it, or the deep-founded beliefs that we clutch out of it, and let's just be really realistic about this. And this was kind of an easy one. It's a really easy one for people to agree on, I think, especially with this specific scenario. And another thing is, we don't need to be mean about it. There's kind of this type of scenario kind of falls, if we're going to put it into those political realms, it falls into the one side that wants to have so much empathy and be extremely kind to the point of putting somebody's life in danger in this specific situation. And then on the other side, let's be jerks about it and let's make anybody feel bad who's not physically able to do this extremely hard thing. And here's the middle ground. We do not need to make every job, we don't need to make everything into something that everybody can do equally. It's okay if some people are able to do it and others aren't. And often that will line up with people's interests. Somebody who likes this type of thing is probably able to do it. Someone who doesn't have a whole lot of interest in it, or is afraid of heights, or doesn't love physical activity, might not be able, or be as likely to be able to do it. So often, the interest aligns with the ability, but sometimes somebody really wants to be able to do something that they're not currently able to do. We don't need to be jerks about it, call them weak or incapable or anything else, and we can provide opportunities for them to learn, to get closer to being able to do it, and maybe one day to be able to do it. Maybe one day to be able to do it better than I can. Because even in this story, I shared a pretty serious shortcoming that I had in the process. But it does not mean that I need to tell someone they're able to do something that I know they're not able to do, especially if I'm in that position of leadership where I need to make that decision and people's lives depend on it. So I think this is an easy one too to point out what the two kind of polarized opposites would say about it, but also to say like it's completely reasonable to meet in the middle. This is not a matter of being super overly accommodating. It's also not a matter of being a jerk about it. It's just a matter of being realistic about the fact that people have limitations. That's okay. It's not something we need to completely tiptoe around. We can be honest about it and nice at the same time. And we can work towards the things we want to be able to do if we can't currently do them, and it will all be okay. So thanks for watching this video, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.